Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we're debuting a new series of videos called Breaking the Bat, where we take a look at how you can take on some of the most challenging armies to face in Infinity N5. And we're opening up with maybe the biggest boogeyman in the edition, Vanilla Combined Army. Before we get started, big thanks to Jordan of the Lost Lieutenant podcast and local legend Dion for their valuable insights in making this episode. They're both Vanilla Combined players, and having their experience to draw on and their opinions really helped put this video together. So, what makes Vanilla Combined Army so hard to fight? Vanilla Combined presents a unique set of skills that add a lot of mental load to the game. These are things like Mnemonica or Sepsitor, other unique pieces of equipment, or even unique combinations of equipment that you might not be familiar with. As well as everything else Vanilla Combined presents, these unique skills and interactions can really put a lot of mental load on your capacity to make good decisions. They've got a very high build variety in the periphery of their list. We're going to take a look at the general structure of a Vanilla Combined army a bit later, but while the core of their lists tend to stay the same, they can present a number of different threats, kind of in the more interchangeable parts, that really affect what they can do to you and the strategies you might need to implement to stop that from happening. They've got a very high snowball potential, and this is mainly through skills like Prothean, where their units can get stronger and stronger and stronger, and really run away with the game unless you can nip them in the bud early. They've also got units who absolutely excel in their role, whether it's absolutely brutal hackers, CC units, or gunfighters, that you yourself are very unlikely to outdo in that category or take on a direct confrontation on their playing field. This means instead of being able to return fire in your active turn, you're usually having to get more creative than just giving to them what they gave to you. They've got a very strong hacking game in a current meta where hacking is extremely strong, where a lot of missions have hacker bonuses, and where heavy infantry is getting more and more common as their points have dropped drastically. Having a really strong hacking game has become quite important, and Vanilla Combined has one of the best. They've also got very durable, high-impact gunfighters, and units like the Corranted and Suryats, who have a lot of wounds, have a lot of armor, and have a lot of punishment they can dish out. They've also got a very strong reconstitution potential, with units like Dr. Worm, who can easily put their army back together if pieces start to fall off. Finally, there's a lot of very scary hidden information. If there's a troop missing in deployment, it could be a number of things, which you'll have to look out for. And any Combined Army reserve drop is also likely to be quite terrifying. So what do Vanilla Combined have the ability to do to you? A Vanilla Combined list wants to disassemble your defenses with vision control, warbands, and scalpels. Then ideally, they want to scalpel out your hackers and or lieutenants. And once they've scalpeled out those hackers, they're in a very advantageous position where they can kind of get more free and rampant about taking control of the board. And if they're able to scalpel your LT, that's another point in the game where they can really pull ahead and start snowballing. They want to outdo your units in the same roles. They want to be frying your hackers with their hackers. They want to be shooting down your guns with their guns. And they want to push those advantage states to their absolute limits. In the late stages of the game, they want to start reassembling their defensive matrix to close out that game, picking up those TR bots or picking up wounds on a Teucer to lock out games once some of your resources have been expended and they've been able to put those resources back together in a way that can screen you out from doing anything useful. They also want to take objectives as necessary or in the late stages of the game once they've got a very strong grip. So what does Vanilla Combined Army not want you to do to them? Vanilla Combined are very afraid of their hackers being scalpeled before they can effectively protect themselves. Vanilla Combined sort of has a pattern of units that start the game in a very weak or vulnerable position, but can quickly protect themselves through marker states, extra wounds, firewalls, positioning, that sort of thing. So they're afraid of having their hackers killed before they're able to get into Cybermask, get into a very defensive position, get extra wounds, So if you can jump on those hackers early, that's quite effective. They're also very worried about their defenses being rendered irreparable. If you put down a vanilla combined TR bot, for example, if you have the opportunity to, it's always worth the extra order just to get that corpse off the board, especially if they have a slave drone or a Dr. Worm nearby. This means that when you fully dislodge that piece, they don't have that potential for reassembly, and it permanently strips something from their grid, which can really hurt a vanilla combined list. You can kill any of their big 3 units, which we'll talk a bit more about later, but most vanilla combined armies have 1 to 3 key units that their whole list is really resting on. If you can kill one of those, that really sets a combined player back. They can also be pinned under very extreme ranges. Vanilla Combined have good gunfighters, but those gunfighters don't tend to be able to shoot effectively over 32 inches. They have a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, if you can get a really nice long fire lane and set something up there watching with a visor and a non-visor, that can really punish a Vanilla Combined player. They're also very afraid of losing their vision control. This links in a bit with some previous points, where they can't shoot over certain ranges, and vision control includes things like white noise from their hackers, or smoke from their warbands like the Datarazi. If you can start taking out those pieces and make them unable to really effectively advance, that's another great way to stymie a combined army player. If you can cull the order generators around any of those big 3 units, kind of take that 4 from under them, that's a very good way to get under them as well. And then also their heavy armor that they can't crack. Vanilla Combined does have good guns and has a few good weapons and ways around armor, but it's not as easy in some other factions. And multi-wound, high armor ARO pieces can really prove to be a bit of a struggle. So let's look at a structure of a Vanilla Combined list. And you can sort of think of it as an onion with a core at the center and then layers going out from that core. So what's at the core? The core of a Vanilla Combined list usually has 1 to 3 50-plus point models that are the key to the success of the list. These are units like Nourkias or Samaritans, Charontids, Avatars, Anthematics, the kind of repeat big linchpin pieces you tend to see in Vanilla Combined armies. Now, the reason this is set up kind of as it is with this layered list structure is because you have this core, and then the rest of the list is really built around supporting this core of the 1 to 3 big 3 models. Around that, in the next layer, you've got the periphery, which is the hackers protecting the hackable pieces and extending the range of those apex hackers. You've got the scalpels, who are taking out units and problem pieces that those core units can't handle. You've got defensive units, stopping an offensive advance from reaching these big core units, button pressers to close out missions, and warbands to cover those ranges. Then you've got the final layer, which is the junk, which is sort of your cheerleaders, can include warbands here too, some support units like Evo hackers and Dr. Worm, that kind of thing. But the big exploitation you can see in this structure of a list is that if you can peel off any layer, the list is going to fall apart. Whether this is taking out the core of those 1 to 3 units, making that big support structure pointless, or whether you're stripping away part of that support structure to really hamper what the core of that list can do. So let's take a look at some common core units and see what they're about. One of the most popular this edition is the Corranted. The Corranted comes in 2 flavors, a hacker or a heavy machine gun with MSV3. No matter what profile you pick, it's always got ECM Hacker -6, BTS 6, and 2.5 wounds, and carries a hefty ballistic skill 14 and whip 16. So hacking this thing is very difficult, it's quite a good shot, and it's quite resilient. The role the Charonted plays in a list is either as an apex hacker or gunfighter, and as a durable cornerstone the rest of the list can fall back on. It's also got very high synergy with vision control. The MSV3 heavy machine gun can shoot through smoke provided by Datarazi, and the hacker, who doesn't have the MSV3, can put down its own white noise to shoot through with an X-Visor BS-14 plasma rifle that can reach out quite a lot further than you might think. The weaknesses of the Corranted is that it's very defensively vulnerable if mispositioned. It's usually only responding back with one die, unless it's suppressive, and it also gets CC'd very easily if it overexposes itself. It can also be impacted by advanced hacking programs. These are things like Trinity AP, or Trinity Neg3, or even some of the stronger Oblivion +1 bursts, say from a Deva or Danavis. But otherwise, if you've got, average or middling hacking, that's not a good way to take this guy on. So generally with the Charonted, he'll be hanging out somewhere on the back line with his heavy machine gun, or be moving up with that plasma rifle hacker. So if you can get him in a position where you've got an opening for a close combat unit, or a high armor cracking gun like a Feuerbach, that's a great way to deal with the Charonted. Next up, you've got Nourkias, and more generally, the Samaritans. Their general role are as high mobility hackers and CC specialists, most having EM or Vorpal weapons, which are monofilament. They've got Prothean stealth, and Nourkias specifically has immunity arm, which means that he's not going to be taking extra saves from missiles or anything like that, and can generally make very high impact plays without having to worry about his own health. The role in the list is to alpha strike key units, or a volume of exposed units. The volume of exposed units more leans towards the Prothean, where Norcius can run into close combat with something, even if there's a number of units with lines of sight on him, kill that unit, gain 1 to 3 wounds, and then take a number of hits and keep on trucking. Or he can go for those really key units like the hackers that can threaten him, or some of the key units like defensive units, guns looking up, or lieutenants. And after he powers up, after he gets those wounds under his belt, he can become nearly unstoppable, and a force you just at some point have to ignore and accept as a presence. Now, Norcius has recently lost his marker state, which is really impactful, and he's extremely vulnerable without those extra wounds. Without the extra wounds, Nourkias is just BTS3 with no ending cap, and can easily be Trinity'd, or, if mispositioned, which very unlikely early game, can be shot at. But if you've got first turn, and you have a way to project your network, going after Nourkias is a really good idea before he can power up, get those extra wounds, position well. He can also be counter-hacked through repeaters, where if he's trying to move up into your lines, if you can have a flash bot watching a close angle to where he can't stealth past your repeaters, that can be really annoying if he has a great volume of hacking incoming, and he can have his time wasted by smartly putting down arrows. Nourkias is a unit who really needs the support of the rest of the list and that periphery element to make the most out of his orders and out of his movement potential. So if you can shut that down with very smart uses of arrows, which we'll have an example of later, Nourkias can really be stymied in that way. Next up, we've got Sheshkin, who's a very highly mobile gunfighter and CC specialist. Like Nourkias, she's also got Prothean, where she can eat up and power up with those wounds, stealth, and a nano screen, which means she's very hard to misposition and can be very hard to punish. Sheshkin's role in the list is as a primary gunfighter, usually with a BS-14 PS5 Red Fury. Once she gets into the midfield, she can really rule the roost in that area with her perfect range bands for there, and being really great in that close combat role, going on suppressive as well. There's a number of ways to position Sheshkin where she can just be incredibly dangerous to attempt to engage once she gets going and once she gets properly positioned in the midfield. And she's also got massive alpha strike potential. I can name a number of times a Sheshkin has made it into my deployment zone, picked up a few wounds, and then the game's just over from there. Now, one of the big weaknesses of Sheshkin is, of course, she can't engage over those 24 inches, and that's where that tip earlier about locking down, trying to get very long range bands, sort of comes in, where you can waste units' times, you can waste the time of the periphery units, and she can, again, be vulnerable without those extra wounds, even if she has that nano screen. And look, if she really does get mispositioned, and sometimes opponents can feel safer having that nano screen and get, a bit of hubris working against them, a high burst weapon into Sheshkin can punish her if mispositioned. But she is one of the harder units to punish and exploit if played properly. Next up, the Anthematic. A really potent model, and one that really puts the fear of God into me personally. Very potent surprise attack hacking, with hidden deployment, with a marker state, a really hard unit to pin down, and one we might see a bit of a resurgence for now that Norcius has lost his marker state. On top of some just fantastic hacking with that surprise attack and marker state, still rocking a MIM-6 plasma rifle, which can do some damage up close, and having stealth as a hacker is really, really potent. Its role in the list, similar to Nourkias or the Corranted, is to provide that apex hacking to the list, but more focuses on being very hard to interact with. A well-played Anthematic can almost be impossible for an opponent to get a beat on or even have a chance at attacking. And with that plasma rifle, you can really clean up a midfield late game and capture those objectives. Its weaknesses really are close combat units with a good willpower. This might be something like Shaolin monks or Lian Kai, who might be able to put a discover on the Anthematic if they can move up well enough. Or a sensor is another really great way to attack the Charonted. Sorry, not the Corranted, the Anthematic. But if you do see an Anthematic across the table, this is one of those units where the best strategy to deal with an Anthematic is to deal with the periphery and the junk around it. Even though it's a really hard unit to interact with, by wiping out the list around it, you can usually starve it of orders, especially if you can pay attention to what's in what group and really target things there. Then Achilles, a relatively new addition to the roster. He's a complete package Alpha Striker, 3 wounds, Mim 3, Nano Screen, and Stealth, and is really just there to kick ass. I wouldn't say he's as strong as some of the other units, so he's got some more glaring weaknesses. He can really get shot to pieces after frenzy hits. He's got a relatively low arm at only arm 3, and he's very hackable. He will usually be starting a bit of the ways up the field, doesn't really have any hacking defense, a marker state, or anything like that. So that covers the main set of core units. They really rely on stealth for freedom of movement, just taking a look at some general exploitable patterns. They're relying on that stealth, so keeping eyes on them is very important. A lot of them are very fragile in the first turn. This is looking specifically at those Prothean models and models who don't start in a marker state, but are able to get into a marker state once the game starts. They're mostly hackable. I think, with the exception of Sheshkin, all of those core units really suffer if you can get a really high quality hacker on them, or even in the case of Achilles, just a hacker on them can really ruin their day. And they all seem to struggle if engaged at a long range, with the exception of the Charonted, but even then, it doesn't want to go above 32 inches. They can really have their time wasted or be boxed in by some smart and overlapping arrows, and can all struggle against an ablative defense, where maybe you're setting up, mine layers, a lot of camouflage units, that sort of thing. So we're talking a lot about smart arrows, and let's dive a bit deeper into that. So we need to consider what is a smart arrow, and what are the units we're trying to get that smart arrow on. So, who are the units we're trying to keep smart arrows on? Where are they likely to strike from? What vision control do they have, and to where? And can I hold a tight but impactful line? So if you've got someone like a Nourkias, they are a unit who is very fast, but doesn't have a way to cover themselves, or their advance. They're likely to strike in a very dense area, where they can move to a position, get some wounds, and then be able to move out without getting too many lines on them. What vision control might Norcius have depends entirely on the units around him, so pay attention to who's around, where the repeaters are, where the smoke-throwing Datarazi are, and can you hold a tight but impactful line in a place you think he wants to go? Can I have eyes on them as they cross my repeaters? What positions will make these elements the hardest to dig out. So you're really focusing on being very narrow with where you're looking and very defensive with those arrows. And where can my non-lethal arrows shine? One thing that all of these units hates is a flash pulse or an emitter or a mad trap. They shut down all of these models. So let's take a look at how we can put some of these thoughts about arrows in practice. So here's a game from my recent video where I was playing against Dion's combined army with my white company, where my opponent had deployed first, and then I had the opportunity to set up a defense against that. So going into this, I was thinking about overlapping primary and secondary lines with different styles of vision control. So over here we can see Nourkias is deployed, and already when the game started, my opponent said he wanted to go first. I made sure to pick the side for him that was more open, where I can get more lines down, where you can see my line is a lot more dense, which means I can block off things. For example, this flash pulse spot here is safe from, say, the Corranted, because this big building is larger than this building. And he's holding two very nice, tight lines, here and here. So with Norcius, we've pinned him in with a lot of lines at extreme ranges, and you can see I've put the primary lines here in black, and the secondary lines here in red. So I've got Norcius up here, but he's got a Dadarazi, which means he's going to have smoke, and he's also got some repeaters nearby him, which means he's going to have that white noise. So to combat that, I've got a non-MSV ARO piece with a line straight down to here, as I know Nourkias wants to press this button, and I've got an MSV arrow piece looking down this way, where he's likely to want to roll out maybe in this way, and then if he wants to come challenge this core, is likely to come to this position or to try and go around. So now that we've set up those two big primary lines, over 32 inches, to try and pin in Nourkias, let's have a look at some of the secondary lines I've set up. We can see I've got a war core looking out this way, trying to catch him if he comes around this corner instead of this way, as well as a TR bot covering that same lane. And you can see where I've put these lines out. A lot of them are crossing over, which is what we really want for two reasons. The first is to put more pressure if he attempts to move through some of these X's, and you can see a lot of these X's are points where it's getting closer to my deployment zone. While there's maybe only one or two lines going out to here or to here, as he's getting closer, we're making sure to put 3 lines here, 3 lines around here, to make it very difficult for Nourkias to make a full run on us. So we've got some flash pulses looking out to cross lines and cover those lines, and some shorter lines just in case he gets very, very close, and in the case of the flash bot, also to have eyes on him to break his stealth. Then on this side we can see we've got the Charontids over here as the next piece, and really with the Charontids, we're looking to present him with a minimal amount of units he can take shots at without overextending. So while the Charontids could make his way all the way down to, I don't know, say this position to try and take on the MSV arrow or even the non-MSV arrow, that would leave him vulnerable to these 2 CC units that I've deployed down here. If the Charontid moves all the way out, ends himself here after killing these 2 units, then it's likely that he's there without having much time to retreat, especially if I pip orders off of the Charontids group. So, to that extent, you want to be aware of who's likely to make the biggest move here. In this specific deployment, I think Nourkias is less likely to be able to get out of here and get to my DZ for a big alpha strike, which is really what you're afraid of. If Nourkias moves up here, presses a button, and that's it, really that's okay. He's a 50-plus point unit. If that's all he does in the turn, I'm very happy about that. So what I'm really more scared of is this Corranted. So if I pip some orders off the group the Charontids in, hoping, he comes out, takes a gunfight here, maybe takes 1 or 2 orders. Same thing with the War Core. Spend again, come around. Already that's maybe, 5 or 6 orders, leaving him not much to do in terms of retreating, where we can then capitalize on him on these close combat threats. A savvy opponent is also not going to move into that position where they know they can be taken out by a Lian Kai or a Shona Carano. So we can encourage them to overextend by really kind of sweeping our main pieces over this way and present them a punishment for overextending. So this is two examples of ways to hem in those units that don't necessarily want to move up, who need to go all the way, like Nourkias or a Corranted hacker or an Anthematic, and then a way to deal with these other units like a Sheshkin, like a Corranted HMG. So now let's take a look at some common units and counters to the peripheral elements you can expect to see in a vanilla combined list. First up, we've got the pitcher hackers, and we can see in the middle here, we've got Young Bit, the Dartok, and Pandora. And what do these units do? They're all about extending Vanilla Combined's hacking network and providing secondary hacking if one of their big three is a hacker, or primary hacking to a list if one of the big three isn't a hacker. The role on the list is to land those pitchers, mainly to scalpel out enemy hackers with killer hacking devices. As we noted, a lot of those core units have a weakness or a vulnerability to that hacking. They also want to use those pitchers to lock down our deployment zone and lock down objectives against hackable targets like heavy infantry or other hackers who may want to advance into the midfield or to objectives. Now, a key thing to note with all these units are they're all very squishy, not only to, guns in close combat, but they'll all die to even a run-of-the-mill killer hacking device. They generally have an average whip, but low BTS. So if you can extend your network to them, or even if there's only, one or two hackers in the list going through their repeater, that's another way to get at them. So there's a lot of pressure on the combined army player to land those pitchers and then take out the target quickly before a counterattack can come through that vector. Due to the generally low ballistic skill and lack of link bonuses, pitcher hackers can also be pretty unreliable in landing pitchers and order intensive. A Dartok is slinging 1 on a 12, Bit and Kiss are slinging 2 on 11s. These are fine if you've, got the time and the baggage, but that's not something you necessarily want to do. And we've seen in the previous examples, a lot of setting up against Vanilla Combined is just setting up to waste their time. They're very, very capable armies, but if you can waste enough of their time, they can't do any of that great capability they have. Next up, the Scalpels. These are units like Speculos, like Grief Operators, and Raziats. So what do? They deploy in the opponent's deployment zone, or very close to it, and have the tools to kill effectively in close quarters combat. The role they have in the list is to eliminate lieutenants, or key defensive elements. Maybe you've got a Thunderbolt TR bot giving them problem, or a John Hawkwood setting up. And if they're going second, they also present a big order sink to dig out, or have that lingering threat be there outside the deployment zone. Now, these units can be locked out by good deployment that's thinking about where are your units looking, what are they vulnerable to, what kind of lines have different units gone, and these units are usually only one wound with very little or no defensive tech. Now, every vanilla combined list is also going to have some defensive units that provide lethal threats to your own army's advancement, and waste your time into getting into those core units or wiping out enough of that junk or periphery around the list to really make a dent in the list's capability. The role in the list is to provide a really consistent pressure on the opponent, where a lot of the defensive units can extend their defensive capabilities and be picked up if they get knocked down. And once they get picked up again, they're up to maintain that pressure. Now, vanilla combined defensive pieces do have a key weakness in that they're relatively solvable. A TR bot with that mimetism can very easily be shot down by an MSV ARO piece over, a certain length, or through smoke. Same with Tucer, though he's been, a pretty potent unit that I've personally played against. Chucking down some white noise, getting a good gun on him, is a relatively easy way to solve Tucer. Also, if you can manage to fully blow off these defensive units, that's a big blow to a list that otherwise really wants to reconstitute those pieces. Then you've got the button pressers. They provide a means to complete objectives, and they're there to capture buttons, press buttons, or counter-capture objectives and defend them once they've been captured. They're usually very squishy and will die once revealed, but if you know they're there, or if you know they're coming, you can try and scalpel them prematurely before they can get those buttons pressed. And that puts pressure on other elements of the list to start advancing and start capturing those objectives. So, let's look at how in that previous game we talked about, I put pressure on the peripheral elements of my opponent's lists. So here we can see we've got Bit up at the corner as a pitcher hacker, and we've got a couple of defensive elements here that we need to take care of. So how can we deny their purpose and what they want to do while exploiting their weaknesses? So let's look at the defensive units first. We can solve these with a mix of white noise and smoke shooting, where the Hideout MSV has smoke support from a Varangian and can take that on pretty consistently, and using a big weapon with a big save and lots of saves to try and permanently wipe them off the table. Then in terms of Chooser, we have white noise from one of our hackers, and he can come up over this way, get a line on Chooser, and knock him out with some white noise shooting, and that's their defensive elements taken down. Next, let's talk about the pitcher hackers. So in this case, I've set up where my opponent is going first, and I've made sure to put my pitcher hacker in a hard-to-reach location way at the back of the board over here. The real two big lines this unit is going to have is to put a pitcher down this way, or down this way by standing up here. But where I've put it, it's going to be very hard to get a pitcher line on it, where if I can do some moving, get to this position, chuck a pitcher down, and counter-hack them, that's going to be really effective. So, if you can position in a way where it's very hard for your hacker to get a pitcher landed on them, but you can threaten quite a good counter pitcher if you had a bit of movement potential, that's a great way to deal with that periphery element of a list. So let's take a look now at the junk. First up, you've got the warbands, who very much just punch good and throw smoke. They enable a lot of the aggressive vision control exploitation of the rest of the list, and are the first point of contact if you want to run into a combined army player's deployment zone, or if someone's running into your deployment zone. Now, a lot of warbands, they're very similar. The weakness is always that they're dead if they're caught out of position, but combined army players are usually very good at positioning and using their warbands. Nonetheless, getting some early kills on their smoke throwers can really set them back. Then the cheerleaders, they're just there to provide orders and provide repeaters, and like with the warbands, they're dead out of position and can't defend themselves. What's unique about Vanilla Combined Army is you're likely to see quite a lot of cheerleaders, usually taking up at least 4 slots, sometimes more, and if you can take out those orders, who again can have trouble defending themselves, you can put yourself in a really good position. Maybe this is with a fast CC specialist like Liang Kai, or maybe it's with a drop troop like a Hellcat or a Tiger Soldier, who can land straight there and start making shots. So let's put it all together. To beat Vanilla Combined, you need to destroy a layer of Vanilla Combined's list building, which is either the core layer, the periphery layer, or the junk layer. The core is the most impactful layer to remove, but can be the hardest, where the units usually have a great amount of capability and can defend themselves, especially well with the help of the units around them. The periphery, in some ways, is the easiest to peel off with the right tools, but is very dependent on you having those tools. If they have a chooser up, but you don't have white noise or albedo, you just might not have the tools to remove that periphery. Same with good hackers or pitchers. If you don't have a way to extend your network to their hackers and take them out that way, you might not have the tools to peel off that periphery. Then, lastly, junk is really fantastic as a layer to peel off, but is usually very hard to reach, and sometimes harder to reach than the core of the list. So, let's talk about some of the tools to bring if you're expecting to come up against Vanilla Combined. You want ranged weapons who are resilient, which means multiple wounds or high armor, which Combined Army can sometimes struggle with. Have range bands over 32 inches, which we've explored a bit earlier in this video, and have a mix of visors and non-visors who can exploit the different types of vision control that a combined army list has to it. You really do want to bring some unhackable close assault to at least threaten some runs on core units or peripheral elements, and network projection or scalpel units who can really bring those tools to take out one of these layers. Also, just as a general piece of advice, a sensor is also a very useful piece of equipment to bring, but it's a bit boutique. Not every list can fit it, but it's one to keep in mind. Alternative tools are viable coordinated orders to crack hard targets, and this might be more appealing to Ariadnes or Hakislams, who can use these coordinated orders to take down a very hard core unit, or even some periphery elements, and a blade of defense screen to stop a snowballing alpha strike. If you can waste enough time, and maybe we're looking at units like Peacemakers and Moonrakers, who can really stop that snowball from starting by just wasting time and making it difficult to approach. And you really need to bring a strong plan once the opposing player's list has been revealed. One of the scariest parts about Vanilla Combined is that you can never be exactly sure what's coming at you, but once their list has been revealed to you, if you can think back to this video, think back to the specific counters, and match up the tools you have, you've got a recipe for success. So, thank you all for watching, and I hope you guys will enjoy this new series. Please tell me about some other armies you'd like me to see make videos on, how to crack, or if you've had some very hard matchups recently, I'd be keen to hear about those too. Now, thank you so much for watching. Please check out another video on the channel, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube things, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.